Hello everyone. My name is Younès Rabii, and this is thank you for hosting me and allowing me to give this talk named "Where is Walid?" Also subnamed "Where are Muslim people and cultures in video games?" So my name is Younès Rabii. So I'm going to yeah, my name is Younès Rabii, also known on the internet under the pseudonym of Pyrofox. Don't judge; it's just chosen by a teenager. Um, and I've been a game developer for about 10 years, something like that. And I'm also a researcher in games AI at Queen Mary University of London with my colleague Florence, which I had the pleasure of saying before me. And so this talk is about, as I said before, the where can we find video games that feature Muslim people or elements from Muslim culture into it. Um, Before starting the talk, I'd like to nail down a few things. The first is that my background myself. I am I'm French. I was born in France. My parents are Moroccan. They come from northern Africa, and I grew up as a Muslim in French society, which is like a very specific type of like culture and way of living. So my viewpoints don't represent every Muslim people on earth at all, and you'll see why later because there's so many of them. And my research, the things I represent to you, when I will say, hey, I tried to look into this and I didn't find something, it's not exhaustive. I did my best to find some things, and I'm not saying that some games or some things don't exist. I'm just saying that I didn't find them, basically. And all this work that I'm presenting to you was done in 2021. So this research, this small research project that I done was done 2 years ago. So things have changed a little bit from now, and we get to speak about why later. But first, before that, I think it's going to be useful to have some statistics in mind, some numbers. So this big blue square represents like the whole population of Earth, and this green square represents like the population of Earth of people who are Muslim. About 1 in 4 persons on Earth right now are Muslims. You can have a look at their distribution on the Earth. So we can see that surprisingly, it's surprising for a lot of people, not all of them are living in the Middle East or Northern Africa. The biggest Muslim population of the world is in Southwest Asia, actually. Southeast Asia, actually. And we have a lot of them, of course, like in Middle East and Northern Africa, was where the Muslim faith was founded, so it makes sense. A lot of in Sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of Europe, but not that much in Northern America and Latin America, like comparatively. These are still very big numbers. And Muslims as a group are extremely diverse. It's very hard to be able to point one group and say these are Muslims. They have very different cultures, very different ways of living their religion, very different values, and because we're going to speak about how they are presented in video games, it's important to have in mind that they are extreme diverse also in their body types and their characteristics. And I'd like to show you a small video from a project named Alhamdu. It's like an American project where the goal was to present like this idea of, in the same vein as Afrofuturism, this idea of what they call Muslim futurism. It's kind of like idealist future where basically Muslim people exist in public space and they are not seen as threats or victims of violence or perpetrators of violence. They just exist as themselves, and they kind of like made this whole very cool like project, like a kind of like, I know because you're my neighbors, you don't like them, but like sometimes there's good stuff in music video production, there's like cool stuff to see, and they made this cool like music video that features like lots of like clothes, lots of styles of people who are in America, but like are from like very, very different Muslim countries of America. I'm going to show you like an extract because I would love for you to try to see these images, try to keep them in mind and compare them to the one we'll see later during the talk, right? Into can make the volume bigger, but that's okay. It's just like you can try if you want. Yeah, there's a way. That's okay. That's fine. So Alhamdu is the name of our project. And they have this very cool like music video represent like artists and people from fashion industry, from also the game industry sometimes. In this video represent like most people wear clothes from their own culture, and with like a kind of like hip fashion twist to it. And you can see like this whole diversity in like clothes, in the way they behave also. Some people are like a bit more bold, a bit more like enthusiastic. Some people like a bit more like um, distance from others, you know? Like there's a whole lot of diversity of people, of even mindsets when you step there. So going back to the talk, can you see that slide? Yeah, can see. Going back to the numbers, so we know that 1 in 4 human beings on Earth are Muslim, and we have seen like a wide diversity of all of them as a small snippet. But what's happening in the cultural media, right? And the first examples we have, because the first numbers that have been studied on something that's similar to video games, but not video games, are movies. And here, on a study of like 200 Western movies, coming from mostly American movies, but not only, we have found that in the characters who have dialogues, which is a subset of them, about 1 in 100 characters are Muslim. So you can see like the disproportion in like representation of like who are people who gets to be on screen, who gets to be visible, and who get to be characters. And then if we look into more like which kind of roles Muslim people have in movies, you can see that in huge part there's this theme of violence that is going to be there. Like most of them will be presented in the movies as victim of violence, and most of the other half will be presented as the perpetrators of violence, and only a very small portion will not be a character that is not either a victim or either a perpetrator. So there's this huge idea of like violence that is always there in the mind of people. So not only Muslims in movies are underrepresented at all, but also when they are always, always, always like presented through like the angle of like violence that is either be made on them or they are supposed to be like the one making violence. What about the games? That's the question here. Can we find games where we can where we find it? Sorry, here's a small challenge that I took 2 years ago. It was during the month of Ramadan. So if you don't know what Ramadan is, it's like a holy month in the Muslim calendar, where basically each day you don't eat from the rise of the sun to the sunset, and you're supposed to be like focusing on spiritual activities, on reading, but also thinking about your place in the world, like activism stuff, like projects like that. So I wanted to do one thing, which is like during Ramadan, during each day, find one game that presents elements coming from Muslim cultures or feature Muslim characters. And that's a challenge we're going to go on together, right? There's a small counter in the top left, top right, that shows how many games we have found up to this point, and I explain where I've found them. So as this Professor Layton says, the game is afoot. Let's go. First up is the mainstream medias, like the AAA games. That's cool. We have a bunch of Arab and Muslim characters here. That's interesting, right? What all of these have in common? Yeah, you got it. They are archetypes. They are stereotypes that are roughly negative for the most part. So we have like this talk made at GDC by Fouad Dakwar. So I'm trying to remove that thing so you can like read. Okay, I can't spell it. So Fouad Dakwar in 2020 made this talk named Archetypal Arabs, the Nuances of Arab and Muslim Representation in Games. And what he did is that he compared the stereotypes of Arabs in cinema and within video games, and found that basically they are the same ones. And Fouad also had like a classification in place with like 4 big archetypes. We have like the decadence, we have the soldier, we have the shepherd, we have many of those. And all of those are negative stereotypes. Like they represent like one fantasy like the West has on Muslim people, and all of them are negative to their core. They either present like a kind of like savagery, or a kind of like brutality, or a kind of like foolishness, stuff like that. Or stuff that's interesting, all these characters are Arabs, and I showed you before. Not all people on the screen when we showed you like the diversity of Muslims in the world are Arabs, and actually not most people, not most Muslims are Arabs. That's not the case. So all these peoples are Arabs, and the thing is, we're going to late in this talk, the identity of being Arab and being Muslim are going to be sometimes fused because of that, because of the confusion that we have in the Western world between these two groups. Like we don't even see them as different groups. We don't even like access the nuance of who these groups are. We just like merge them together into like this kind of like rough shape, which is like Arabs, Muslim, yeah, same shit. And other stuff about these characters found in AAA games, um, all of them lack cultural research. Like sometimes it's painful. It's very painful. Like sometimes these are mistakes, and sometimes even some stuff can be like very insulting and offensive, and could have been solved if there was at least one person in the room who was actually Arab who could say, "Don't do that. Like, don't do that, please." For example, having an Arab Egyptian character and taking one voice actor that is not only not Arab, not Egyptian, but specifically Israeli. Yeah, not great. Like, what the hell, man? Like, what's happening there? There's like erasure even at the space of voice actors. Like, this is wild. And you have constantly have things like that, or you have characters who are supposed to represent a kind of like complex US background. We have, for example, if I'm not mistaken, this character from Rainbow Six Siege, who has a background of being half Palestinian, half Israeli. That's very interesting as a character. Does that show in her story? No, not at all. She is basically written as a full Israeli character. And it's like hard sometimes as like a person who knows about the subtleties and all of this to say, this is not the right story you're saying. Like, there's something interesting here for sure. We can make very interesting things, but you are doing it in a very wrong way. And there's work before us, like before having this talk. Like we have, for example, the academic Edward Said, who wrote this book and who developed the concept of Orientalism that I'm not going to spend too much time on right now. But Orientalism is basically this: how the West has created this idea of the Orient, and specifically at this time, the Orient is the Arab world and some of the countries nearby, and how the Orient is supposed to represent like everything that the West isn't, and everything that the West somehow desires but can't access. So the West is supposed to be like this kind of like very rational place where there's freedom and rationality and technology and and a lot of power and like the right religion too. In the Orient, there's three main things to have in mind, which is basically kind of like a very bad thriller movies, which is like war, sex, and mysticism, drugs, kind of, you know. And so the Orient is painted as a place that is like always at war, full of barbaric people who can't like have wars in like in a civil way. They just like kill each other and spill blood. It's this place where people are decadent. They have sex in unusual ways, like in strange ways, either super restrictive or super unrestricted and too wild. And this is good. Like, this is good. Like, we can go there to have sex, but then we come back to the actual world where we have to be. And like this idea of mysticism, where their rights and their beliefs are more primitive, are more closer to nature and closer to being like a simple-minded, whereas like the religions and the beliefs of the West are more like advanced, sophisticated, and less savage in a way. Other thing, all these characters that I showed before are always presented in a context of terrorism and military violence. So we're in a place that is like very similar to movies, actually. And it's useful for the study because we don't have lots of data points for video games. Not a lot of people are doing this work of trying to find Muslims video games. So, but we can see there's like a huge lineage of whatever is happening in video games is not unique to video games. It's a thing which is like in general in Western culture. So here's an update to this challenge. Now we're going to find 30 games who respectfully use elements from Muslim cultures or feature Muslim characters without the big three things: murdering them, mocking them, or fetishize them. And I hope that's not too big of an ask, right? I hope we'll get to 30, like little by little. So the first step I took from before is to play games once more time. And suddenly, even though there's like millions of games made by this type of game industry, I found very few games that I could qualify as meeting the criteria of like not fetishizing, not painting has like in context of violence all the time or warfare, and not fetishizing. And the first one doesn't actually come from a video game; it comes from a comic. So there is this character named Miss Marvel, which is like coming from the Avenger series, who originally came from a comic written by G. Willen Wilson, which is like an American writer. And in this comic, there's this topic where we follow Kamala Khan, which will become Miss Marvel, and the comic speaks about like the struggles of coming from like a migrant Muslim family in America, and also being a teenager, and also having romance and all of these things, but like with this core theme of like, what is it like to be an actual teenager coming from like a migrant Muslim family in America? And so, if I'm not mistaken, there's like multiple Avenger games now, but in 2021 there's like only one where Miss Marvel was presented, so I counted one game in that of it, in the 30. So that's one game in 30 in the vastness of all AAA games. Next up, the next big store is Steam. You all know Steam. Oh, there's still like a bit of French in here, sorry. So there's like about 50,000 games on Steam. In 2021, that was the case. There's probably more now. There's about 50,000 games on Steam. Steam has a platform, has a very strong content restriction, and has publication fees. You have to pay about $100 to be able to publish them, and like what's in your game is heavily restricted sometimes. Here are some examples that I found of games that feature Muslim characters, Muslim history, elements from Muslim cultures. So we have the Arab Republic of Tagia, which is like a strategic game. We have Labyrinth, the War on Terror, where you play basically the CIA trying to contain terrorism in Africa and Europe, and you have like strategy game where like I don't know, I haven't played it, but it's like very odd to be honest. We have a VR game named The Holy City, which is basically a game where you wander around Jerusalem in VR and have access to religious books and you read them. And you have Honey Pop 2, where, if I'm not mistaken, it's at the core a puzzle game where the more you progress, the more you can like unveil characters' identity. Nothing wrong with that specifically as a concept, more like what is actually characters that are presented. And here you can see like this like woman in this attire, which is like paradoxical, where she hides her face, which is like she shows you her breast and her body. Like it's very like belly dancer kind of outfit. Historically, this outfit doesn't have any existence. It's a fully a fantasy of like Western soldiers who went in Africa and basically forced women to dance for her. This is basically a stripper's outfit. You know, that's not something that people wear even to seduce other people. That's just not a thing. It's becoming a thing now because, of course, like there's people who want to become belly dancers, so they try to buy clothes that fit this ID, and they take dance classes that fit this ID. But like historically, this thing doesn't exist. It's a full fantasy. It's perfectly in the fetishism aspect. So the featured themes that I found here is again warfare and terrorism, the fetishization of a Muslim woman, and some interactive documentaries, which I won't sparkle the debate, but I'm not counting as games because their goal is not to engage with you in like a playful way at all. It's basically an interactive documentary. Like for this very specific one, it's just like, hey, you walk somewhere in VR and you interact with them. And there's a perfectly good argument to be made that these are games that could exist. But these are not the type of games I was looking for at the beginning. I was looking for like games in the sense of like games that you play that can educate you, but not things that are made first to educate. You can't really, there's no playful element of the game. It's just like interesting. So I didn't count them, all of these games. I did find one game on Steam. So we get up to 2, thanks to Angar, a game by Mehdi Bahrami, which is a puzzle game where you're invited to create geometric patterns from Islamic arts. So you have like these kind of like tools that people had when they designed these kind of patterns, which is like rulers, pencils, and you have like these cool sliders and stuff, and you try to recreate a specific motif that exists, or you can create your own, which is quite cool and doesn't feature fetishization, warfare, and that, but like very abstract. Yes, like it's not. There's no risks being taken at all here. There's no story that could feature characters that could be here, but it's still one specific example of one aspect of Muslim culture represented without any of Orientalist tropes in them. So we get up to 2, and that's Steam. That's like the second biggest store, or the biggest store online. So the other place I want to find games is itch.io. They have about 370,000 games, and they have a loser content restriction, and the publication fees are non-existent. You can just publish games on there. And I also found games which are resembling the other ones. So, for example, we have Life in Middle East, which is like a kind of like visual novel with cheap stock photos, where same thing. The goal is to basically find a way to date this person, and like this very core idea of like we're trying to unveil this woman, right? Like she's sexy, but she also has her head covered, and like historically there's this strong thing where I told you like I come from France. French soldiers when they invaded northern Africa, the military had these whole campaigns where they had posters where they said to Muslim women who would wear headscarves like this, who would say, "You are prettier without your headscarf. Remove it. Free yourselves." And there is this idea of like this promise that they would see this woman as being oppressed, and but to be free they had to basically unveil themselves. But also soldiers wanted to see this woman. Like there was this aspect of like control of Northern Africa, also through the control of the bodies of women. And like these games is like perfectly in that vein. Like it's not, you're not dating someone who happens to be Muslim. You are playing the fantasy of like unveiling the Muslim woman. That's the thing. Home Guards, I didn't play it, but like very much a game, a warfare game that happens somewhere in the Middle East. And Wudu app. Wudu is the name to say ablution in Arabic. It's again basically not really a game. It's just like it's an application to teach people how to make ablutions, like how to wash your hands and etc. Mostly for children, I believe. So it's also in the veins of like educative games, not really something that's made to be played, more like something that is like a resource to learn something, and that's it. Hopefully, or thankfully, these are not the only games I found. I found also other types of games that are not featured on Steam. And for example, Good Looking Home Cooking, The Legend of Jeans, Myra, 1001 Days, and Path Out. So Good Looking Home Cooking is a visual novel where you follow two persons who want to have their own food truck, basically. And one of them happens to be a Muslim woman. Nothing weird here, rather well written. That's one more game. The Legend of Jeans, Myra. It's a platformer that happens in the Sahara, where you're like basically kind of like what's the name? Indiana Jones style. Basically, your thief going in tombs, investigating ruins, getting superpowers and stuff. And it's done from people from Northern Africa, and they featured like genes, these mystical creatures and stuff. Um, there's no warfare involved. There's no fetishizations. It's one more game. 1001 Days is very interesting. It's a very complex visual novel where you basically, if I remember right, you go in the afterlife and you have all these things, all these like teenage, young adults kind of tropes of like stuff like vampires, stuff like werewolves, but like set with like instead of like the Western mythology, more like the Muslim and Arabic specifically mythology. And you have Path Out, which is like an RPG made on RPG Maker that follows the real story of one kid teenager who fled the how to say that the war in Syria. And at some point during the game, you have very much like snippets of video where the author explains why, like the story behind one aspect of the game, where he really like at some point really had to go through guards, like in stealth games, and he explains why and how he modeled it in these video snippets. So it's an odd one because there's still this aspect of warfare in here, but because it's still from like a civilian point of view, it's not about playing war or continuing war. It's about escaping a huge dramatic human event. I did count it in those games. So the themes here are mythology coming from Muslim cultures, slice of life kind of things, and sometimes autobiographical testimonies. And this allowed us to go up to 15, which is like a huge boost. We got a lot of these games from itch.io, thanks itch.io. And then afterwards, I had to basically scrub the bottom of the barrel. Like, where else could I find games? I did my best, so I like loosened a bit like the definition of games. I was focused on video games at first, and now I went into more like board games kind of. So I found some stuff like on Kickstarter. So Alfingi was a project at the time that was fundraising. It's two things. It's a book and a card game, but it's mostly a book of novels. But because it comes with a card game, I counted it, and it speaks about the interaction, interaction between the various Vikings group and basically the Northern Africa and the various Muslim population that existed. And that's like links. There are links. They had commerce. They had discussions on philosophy and their place in the world and stuff. And these all things that we don't have very much access to. Like there's nothing that most people know, but there's like a strong collaboration and strong exchanges between these two cultures. So it's like a book of novels, that speak about this scope, this exchange, cultural exchange between the two communities. And it comes with a card game. I counted it. There's a few, for example, in the bottom right, sorry. There's like a card game named Harvesty. Harvesty means spouse in Arabic. So it's like an Egyptian game designer wanted to make this game that basically explains all the hardships that come with like the pressure in Egyptian society around marriage. How you have to marry, which kind of money you need to have, which kind of people, like how the place of love with this huge institution of marriage in Egyptian society. And it was fundraising at the time, didn't make it, didn't get enough funds. And then you have Fatima's Busy Day, which is like a very short RPG, tabletop RPG that was made in a contest. This RPG is like only 100 words long, and all the other RPGs in that contest are also the same size. It's a very simple game where you play Fatima, who happens to have, if I'm not mistaken, she wears the burqa. She wears this cloth where you don't even see her face, and it's a game that happens from her point of view, where she does just her like her kind of like slice of life stuff, and you basically witness how people react to it, and you're also allowed to be in the space of Fatima's head and thinking about this tension between how this clove is interaction with like her and the rest of the world, how they see her, how they treat her, and what she thinks, what it represents for her, and what it is. So the themes here are like the history of Muslim cultures, like lost histories or lost testimonies, and like this aspect of slice of life too. And if you compare it, like it's like very similar themes to the ones on Egypt Tile. So these are which are very different than the big three I told you about before. So it's like 19 and 30. And I tried to go a bit more, like to find others. It was a bit hard. Like remember, like it was one a day. So after 19 days, I have still had a few more like trails to go on, like maybe more things on Kickstarter, maybe old Flash games that have disappeared. I could hunt down, maybe possibly. But one thing that happened at that time was in 2021 was simply something that I couldn't ignore, which is the fact that the holiest sites, one of the holiest sites of of all Muslims in the world, the Aqsa Mosque, was being raided by the Israeli police. And if you remember, this was one event that happened at the beginning, at sometime during the month, that escalated slowly and slowly into like a full war with like hundreds of people who were dead and thousands who got injured. And to be honest, I was doing a Twitter thread at the time. And I was like, it's not the time to speak about video games. Like there's like more important things to do right now. Like it felt very silly to be speaking about video games whenever like actually people being dead right now during Ramadan, during like specifically one of the holiest nights of Ramadan specifically. So I decided to stop at that moment. So I stopped at 19 on 30. I didn't have any more games, not a lot of games to go on, but I stopped searching because my priorities at this moment have shifted. And that's a thing that if you speak to um to some game designers, specifically I'm thinking of Rashid Abu Haidi, which is I think the only game designer in Palestine right now, who made one game named Layla and Fears of War, which is a very simple game, kind of like limbo-like platformer where you play this girl who basically escapes the war zone, and you see the I'm sorry, how there is no good decision to be made, how painful it is to leave people behind, not to leave your house behind, stuff like that. And it's very abstract. There's no text or story, just like you just navigate through this space. And it was very hard for Rashid to publish that game, actually. For practical reasons, like sometimes you had to focus on surviving, like day to day, how to get access to food, water, energy, how not to get arrested by the Israeli government. It was very hard for him. And even once the game was published, like it was removed immediately from the Apple Store because it was not seen as a game. It was more like a political statement, according to the Apple Store's um, rules at the time, which is odd because the game is just a testimony in the end, and it doesn't even have like specific mentions of specific conflicts. It's like this general idea of someone escaping conflict. But they knew who Rashid was, where he was publishing the game from, and that tainted the whole thing to them. In parallel, you could find a game on the App Store where you play a rocket with the Israeli flag on it, and your goal is basically like Angry Birds, like exactly like Angry Birds, go and destroy like Palestinian houses, and that's a game. And the Apple Store is like selling it. Thanks, the Apple Store. Thanks to a lot of supports, Rashid managed to get Leyla and Shadows of War back to the Apple Store. And I'm saying all of this to paint to honestly right after. So the conclusion: found 19 games before having to basically shift our priorities for something that is more important. Over 40, so that's kind of sucks. We didn't really get to get to 30 games, and there's like millions of games out there, and I couldn't even find 30 games that don't represent Muslims in such a harmful and insulting way. And the games what we found, they have common characteristics. First of all, they are rare, and they are hard to find. They are not mostly in AAA stores. They are not in mainstream stores. You have to look very closely to find them, and they are made by individuals or small structures that need supports like Kickstarter projects or very small indie studios, sometimes urgently, like Rashid Abu Haide, who stick to making his game but was afraid sometimes for his life when he was making that game. And it's kind of paradoxical, right? That the entities that have the most means and resources to make these games correctly, like AAA games and game industry, have money to spare to hire consultants and to do the research, are the ones who are making the least efforts in the right direction. So here's a simple thing that's, as a conclusion, that I'd love to do with you, is like together, it will be lovely to ask the industry to do better as a whole and to support the smaller human-sized structures. And here are some of my sources coming from my slide. Thank you very much.